Broken Promise Records by A.P. Miller, as read by A.P. Miller. For more information, visit www.millerverse.com. Copyright 2017, A.P. Miller, all rights reserved. Prologue, August 2003. 4 members of the band Echolocation have just graduated high school and have no idea what they want to do with themselves outside of playing music. On this particular night, a big show was held at the Casey Graham Building in Verona Park. 4 bands were on the bill, including Echolocation. To their classmates, Hendrix Wilson, Anthony Antics Reams, Laurie Marshall, and Dan Goss were just a bunch of misfits who weren't going anywhere in life. In fact, they didn't belong in the halls of their high school. To the concert-going crowd, they were a fixture. If you're reading this and you don't feel like you belong, I want you to be okay with the fact that you don't belong. It's that feeling that you don't belong that's going to take you to great places and inspire you to do great things. The world you live in now is not the world you are damned to live in if you don't want to. Pick up a book, read about the things you love, and be prepared to follow those things you love. Even if it doesn't make you filthy rich, you've still lived a life where you lived on your terms. Surround yourself with people who encourage you. Fill your days with people who love you. Give everyone one opportunity to be forgiven and repent, and if they still insist on trying to break you down, you write them off. On this night, Echolocation had just got done playing their show, and some girl from the school TV station wanted an interview. Everyone is sweaty, the boys are shirtless, and everyone is so hopped up on adrenaline that they can't be responsible for the things they say. Thank you for joining us on Voice of a Generation, where we're talking to local musicians about local music. The girl's voice was stiff and clumsy. We're here with Echolocation, who just graduated from Duncannon Valley last year. How was the show, guys? How was the show? Didn't you watch it? Hendrix asked, wiping sweat off his face with his t-shirt. I, did? Well, then what did you think? Danny asked concussively. It was, really loud. It rocked, I guess. The anchor swam in her head for most of the appropriate response. You guessed, Laurie asked. She was offended. It either rocked or it didn't. It either moved you or it didn't. For the love of all that's holy, woman, what did the music do for you? Antics called out from the back of the group. I remember you. You do? Yeah, Antics pointed. You're the girl who told the hall monitor about a bunch of us smoking in the men's room. That was, someone different, the anchor had offered defensively. No, I remember you. Danny got real close to her face. You got Ricky Chalmers suspended for a week because he had the cigarettes on him. That totally wasn't me. What was that nickname they gave you after that? Hendrix quizzed. I don't know of any nickname. Agitation was beginning to surface. Tampon face! Laurie belted out, pointing right in the poor girl's face. Everyone called you Tampon Face for getting the boys in trouble. Oh my God! Hendrix yelled out to the musicians congregating behind him. Guys, we're being interviewed by Tampon Face. It's the girl who got Ricky in trouble for having the cigarettes. My name isn't Tampon Face. The anchor threw her mic down, stomping away, yelling behind her, Assholes! That's where our story starts. It's the mid-2000s. Good music is pirated online, CDs are still purchased, and not a whole lot of people spend their days looking at their cell phones. It was a time when everything was changing. Before the mid-2000s, media was tangible. You had to buy CDs or cassettes, and then iPods happened, and then streaming. You actually had to go to a show and put in effort to discover a band. You wore a shirt for a band that no one's ever heard of? That was your badge of honor for going out and supporting music. Our story revolves around Echolocation, a band in the mid-2000s that had nu metal, down-tuned riffs with classic hard rock melody. Their lyrics were deep and meaningful without being cliche. It was a dangerous point in history when there was no making it huge on YouTube just yet, and obscurity was final. This is their story. Chapter 1. If disappointment could manifest itself into a home, it would surely have been the house that stood before Hendrix Wilson, Danny Goss, Laurie Marshall, and Anthony Antics Reams. There are serial killers who keep body parts in jars that have homes with more curb appeal than the pile of cardboard and asbestos. There was an intangible heft in the air. This was a life-changing moment. One of those life-changing moments when you know you are actively aware of its density. Hendrix scratched his chin. The beginning of a 5 o'clock shadow had presented itself on his perfectly hued skin. His hair hung in shaggy tresses over his forehead, covering his furrowed brow. This was indeed a heavy moment. Hendrix looked to his left where Danny stood. Danny was a little taller than he was. His hair had bleach blonde spikes that stood straight up, and his eyes were intense all the time. Beside Danny stood Antics, who had the worry of the world in his eyes. Antics' hair was short, he was skinny, and his face had a smudge on it that Antics had been oblivious to since middle school. Laurie wore her long raven hair in a braid. She folded her arms over her chest. She was insecure about herself all the time. Her face was made to smile. Her skin was porcelain when she felt good about herself, but she rarely smiled and always looked kind of sickly. Her chronic bouts with depression had taken its toll on her. Anthony, Danny breathed in deep. You've done screwed the pooch, son. Well, it's not that bad, Antics began to defend. Is it? I'm pretty sure discount prostitutes wouldn't do business here, Laurie chirped. Hendrix, Antics pleaded with his eyes. Well, I definitely had a different picture in my head when you described the place. The landlord let me make payments on the security deposit. He didn't do credit checks, And I'm pretty sure he doesn't care about the underage drinking charges on my records or the assault charges on Danny's. The rent is ridiculously cheap, the roof doesn't leak. What more can we really ask for? Antix blurted out in exasperation. Antix is right. Hendricks spoke up to the affirmative. We're living on our own. We can practice and not bother anybody, and let's be honest, we're not going to be able to afford much else working in retail. What do we really have to lose? Hendricks Wilson really was too good for this world, ethereal or otherwise. Most people who ran in their circle had some incredible flaw that kept them from being able to fully embrace the world around them, or kept the world around them from letting them in. Some people have aesthetic compromises, others have emotional ones. Hendricks was good looking, striking blue eyes, a charming smile, and his voice was audible gold. In addition to being eye candy, Hendricks was genuine and sincere. People knew that they could take him at his word. All of these things made people want to be around Hendricks, to trust him without trying. The house, admittedly, was a heap, but it did have charm. The gray exterior paint was cracked and the porch's floorboards were coming up. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the sidewalk and the grass had been committed to hospice long ago. With that being said, the house on West Street had everything that nurtured late teen independence. There might not be granite countertops, but there would always be a place for a friend to crash. The music scene in Duncannon Valley was a who's who of people who would sacrifice for the lives they want rather than the lives that would be more comfortable. If you did the math, you'd find that there wasn't a minimum wage employer in the township that didn't hire two or more of these musicians. They were broke, starving a lot of the time, but they were happy. It was no secret that Echolocation was getting their own pad, so friends in the scene volunteered favors as a housewarming gesture. Ricky had an order that was never picked up, so dinner was covered. Jake Dalton worked at a grocery store bakery, so when a cake fell, there was cake to celebrate with. Luke Pressman just happened to snag a grab bag of soda that was punctured by the forklift during receiving, and so they were set. That's how the scene worked. When Ricky's amp blew up, Hendricks was the first to bring his to the show. When Jake's drummer had to work a double at the last minute, Antix was right there and didn't miss a beat. If the house guy couldn't make the sound work, Laurie would haul ass up to the booth and dial in the sound that everyone was familiar with. It was a free exchange of mixtapes, free admission to shows, and a fraternity that was never put into words. There was no ledgers of favors owed and performed. There were just misfits looking out for their own. Friends came and paid their well wishes. Posters were hung on the walls, loud music was the background din, and the potluck was cleaned up. Under the guise of night, Hendricks and Antix borrowed the van, known around town as the Skank Tank due to Danny's indiscriminate appetite for groupies, and went cruising around for furniture. The rule of the thumb during the crusade was no fabrics or anything that could carry bedbugs or crabs. In the middle of the month, the super at the trailer park was handing out eviction notices to the deadbeats. Men, women, and families would up and leave in the middle of the night because they couldn't afford to live there anymore. It was sad. Hendricks met a guy at Bullseye who'd been hired part-time, hoping to support a wife and kids on the temporary seasonal hours. The trailer park dumpster had just what they needed: a sofa, a table, and some chairs. At about 12:30 a.m., the house had finally cleared. Friends that were more like siblings gave in to decorum and allowed the new tenants of the house to settle in. What had been a raucous party just hours before was eerily silent. As Hendricks and Antix were out on their recon mission of furniture that would be the least likely to give them a skin disruption, Laurie took a chance to get a shower and settle into her room. The bathroom was more in need of a house fire than a woman's touch. The drains in the sink and the bathtub were matching rust rings and calcium buildup that would make the Illuminati of dairy farmers that pay for milk commercials cry. The walls were half tile, half plaster, and both surfaces had a dinge that was either age or despair. Anything with a chrome finish, such as a towel bar or a toilet paper holder, had unnatural discoloration. The mirror was in later stages of deglazing, and only half the surface would reflect. The toilet had a perma stain that looked like the aftermath of Dollar Taco Night at the Burrito Barn, and the water that came out of the faucets looked more like Mountain Dew in the poor lighting of the bathroom. Home sweet hell. Laurie's bedroom was the next door to the bathroom, and the jury was still out on whether or not she'd regret that decision at all. The trek from the bathroom to her room was risky in itself, but the silence said she'd be alright. Each room had to be reasoned for and argued. Laurie didn't have a preference as long as the door shut and her mother wasn't anywhere nearby to beat on the said door. Boys being boys, Laurie was given the first room on the left because it had a wall-mounted mirror on the wall and she would probably need it to do girl stuff. This argument happened 2 months ago when Antix saw the house, and to date, no one has been able to define girl stuff. Regardless of the sexist ambiguity, it was a room of her own, and no one would invade and make her feel inferior for being human. The reality of the move hadn't set in completely for Laurie yet. Something was missing. The frantic screams of disapproval, or the feeling that the walls were closing in. It was gospel truth that the only time that Laurie didn't feel as if life was a gallery of people waiting for the lethal injection to take hold was when she was playing her bass. Now at 18 years old, she lived in a house where she could play her bass anytime she was needed or when she needed to. These walls, this house, and this situation were her salvation, despite how dingy everything appeared. There was someone strange staring at Laurie through the girl stuff mirror. It was a woman. Her eyes were sullen and she was too thin. The strange woman's hair was raven and hung to the middle of her back. She looked like she hadn't smiled for any good reason other than appearances in quite a long time. The woman in the mirror held a towel around herself with an insecurity that was forged in the flames of despair. Up and down the woman's arms was an intricate and complex lattice of scars. A few of the scars were a little less severe than a scratch from a cat. Other scars were deep and broad, a brutal yarn of a girl who felt helpless, and the only control she had was contorted on the delicate skin of her arms. Huh. Lori exhaled. Since she was 7 years old, Lori's doctors had always warned her mother of a potential for dissociative identity disorder. Lori would be physically doing things, materially there for the act. The psychological presence was another story entirely. While she stood in her own room, Lori briefly believed a woman was looking at her in the mirror. The woman looked like Lori, was even wrapped in a towel identical to the Lori's, but it was clearly a different person. It was the scars. The toughened streams of skin, which Lori recognized. The scars are what reconciled what she believed and what she saw. As a gift for herself on her 13th birthday, Lori discovered self-harm. Dawn Marshall, Gordon and Regina Marshall's eldest, flourished under the pressure of high school academia. Vaughn had chased the carrot, the promise of the right amount of study and diligence that she too could leave the Duncannon Valley. Lori, the middle daughter, questioned everything. At times, when she deemed that something was pointless, she'd shut down. 7th grade was pointless. Lori shut down, and Regina could not have been crueler. Birthday evenings at the Marshall house were standard issue. A cake, a superficial exclamation of pride in how much of a wonderful woman they'd grown up to be, and everyone was excused to ignore each other for the night. On Lori's 13th, Regina phoned in the joy and couldn't have been bothered with the pride. Lori's pain was soothed with the broken shard of glass that had been produced by breaking a family picture in her room. Danny held the cordless phone in his hand, staring at it intently. The phone call that he had to make was going to be excruciating, a calculated torture. Who would have guessed that a perfectly placed phone call to a person could actually make someone bleed from the soul? That sounded like some pansy-ass lyrics that Hendrix would write when he was dating Lily Temper, but it's a pretty accurate description of how this was going to feel. Danny tapped the phone against his hand. It would have been easier to prepare to stab yourself in the thigh than it was for him to decide to make the phone call. "Hey, assholes!" Danny called down the stairs. "I'm going to be on the phone and it's going to be pornographic! Don't listen in!" "Hendrix and Annex are gone," Lori called out from her room. "It's just me and I'll stay off the phone." "Thank you, Lori." Danny's tone softened. "Your boyfriend's still an asshole." "I'll let him know." Danny's thumb punched in a series of numbers onto the dial pad. The number poured from memory and Danny actually started to sweat. His thumb cramped. He wiped off his ear before putting the phone to his face. "Hello?" The voice was feminine and sweet, but it was weak. "Hey, Chelsea." Danny's voice cracked. "It's me." "Hey." Chelsea's voice was raspy, still weak, but enthusiastic. "How are you, babe?" "Same as you, I imagine." "Yeah." Danny rested his head against the door. "I bet you are." "Are you doing okay, Daniel?" "I moved in with the guys today." Danny was fighting to hold on to his composure. "House is such a fucking dive." "Is it that house on West Street? The one on Potter?" "Yeah." "Daniel, people were murdered in that house." "My kind of house, right?" "Daniel, you make terrible decisions for yourself." "Chelsea?" "Yeah?" "Tell me something great that's happening in your life. Tell me that you're doing something amazing, that everything is going great. Tell me that you've met someone and you aren't coming back here." "Daniel." "Chelsea, if things don't work out for you, then this whole thing has been for nothing. I promise it won't hurt. Just tell me everything's going great for you." "Well, my classes are going great. I'm thinking about electing in medicine as my major, and I've started seeing this guy named Justin. It might go somewhere we don't know. I'm genuinely happy for you, Chelsea. I really want things to work out for you." "Daniel, I know we said we talk to each other every year on the day, but I don't want you doing this to yourself. You need to get yourself up and moving on with life too." "It all happened because I love you too." Chelsea cut off Danny angrily. "I love you, and because I love you, I have to cut you off, Daniel. No more calling me, no letters, nothing. My family wronged you, and you need to be pissed off about that. You need to be angry, Daniel. Be angry at everyone. No one in this world can stop you when you're angry. Goodbye, Daniel." The phone dropped out of Danny's hand and hit the floor. The battery compartment of the cordless phone popped off and slid across the floor. The truth was, Danny expected the phone call to be like that. Neither he nor Chelsea knew what their scheduled contact was going to be like. Dan was prepared for it to be a one-and-done ordeal, likened to something like bloodletting. Call, they'd cry, and the memory would be exercised. Chelsea was right. No one could stop or derail Daniel Quentin Goss when he was angry. If someone needed to redirect Danny's energy, they had to wait for the hate to burn off, and they were usually waiting a while. It took 3.5 hours and half a tank of gas, but the house on West Street had a sofa and a love seat that was made out of pine, a table, 3 chairs, and a coffee table. It was in the daylight that they all had a good look at how the house was shaping up. While they appreciated all of the posters and the do-it-yourself approach to decorating, Lori had taken it upon herself to straighten out the posters and frame them in strips of black paper. It wasn't really a frame, but it was much more appealing to the eye than the 13-year-old boy chic of just taping them to the wall. Hendrix and Annex rearranged the living room 3 times, trying to find the perfect configuration for entertaining guests while making sure that everyone had perfect auditory access to the tunes. Danny, who was surprisingly good with his hands, mastered the kitchen. He fixed the broken cabinet handles, replaced the ever-elusive ranchoed light bulb, and anchored the garage receptacle to the back porch that was just off the kitchen door. The real artistry in Danny's handiwork was the kitchen stools that he'd built from using some old piping they'd found in the basement. It was crude and uncomfortable, but it would support an ass or two while they ate their cereal. The real burn on time and energy was how much cleaning had to be done before any of them could really feel at home. It was no secret that the house on West Street was the murder house. No one had to clean up any brains or teeth, but every time a new cabinet was opened or a new corner of the basement was discovered, everyone held their breath and said a little prayer. The landlord, Mr. Phelps, was a guy in his late 90s who meant very well. His sight was failing. He couldn't get around very well, but he didn't abandon his property in Potter like the other homeowners did when the bottom fell out on the real estate market. It was a supreme shithole, but a supreme shithole with someone else on the hook. By the late afternoon, there had been 3 van loads of broken shit taken to the city refuse authority. All of the windows had been pried open from being painted shut. The house was airing out, and Lori had lit a few subtle candles in strategic locations. The house was beginning to not smell like a mold farm anymore. While Lori cooked dinner for everyone, Danny, Hendrix, and Antics were in the basement arranging the rehearsal space. This process was an exact science that had to be done very carefully. First was the issue of soundproofing. When the boys emptied out the basement and the attic, there was a lot of carpet underpadding that had to be repurposed. That was the first layer against the wall. The only thing that really stopped sound from cutting through the walls is density. Being that they were in a basement, they didn't have to worry about the concrete walls allowing things out, but the ceiling was allowing sound to go up and then go out. While Danny and Antics were trying to steady the rickety ladder they'd found in the attic, Hendrix was stapling padding to the ceiling. Keeping in mind that density is really what stops sound from coming out, the boys then stapled loads of cardboard and those hard cardboard drink carriers from the only fast food joint in town, Frosty Boss. There was a lot of those drink carriers, and you probably want to know how they got all of them. I could tell you, but it may change your opinion of our boys and the company they keep. Let's just say they were donated. The sun was setting on the second day of echolocation being at the house on West Street. Danny cleaned up dinner while Lori disappeared into her room. She was doing that a lot more lately. In the last 2 days, Lori was scarce when Antics was looking for her. Hendrix was being more careful to see what clothes she was wearing. Her self-harm experiences were not new to anyone. If she were wearing long sleeves, she may be harming, and someone may be able to say something to her to help. As nightfall completely arrived, Antics and Hendrix retired to the porch to have a cigarette. "How'd your mom take it when you left?" Antics asked. "Well, every week since graduation has been, the National Bank of Mom is closing your account." A lot of other tough talk. It was real emotional, like she never thought I'd leave. Think you did the right thing? Leaving was a good thing. I'm developing my sense of independence and adventure, I guess. How about your parents? Antics let out a bitter chuckle before he reached into his pockets to get a cigarette. Hendrix didn't need to ask the question. He already knew what an emotional bloodbath it was at Antics' house. "I think part of me still hopes that my mom could be like Mama Wilson," Antics said as a precursor to a long drag of a cigarette. "And that part of me is the one that hurts the most when she disappoints me. I'm the woman's only son, you know? I'm her only son, and she still chooses her married life over her mother life." Antics Reams got his nickname because of his ADHD affliction. It was so bad that his first grade teacher actually got fired for tying him to a chair. Anthony didn't want to be the class clown. He wanted to be loved and respected just like anyone else. Home was a safe place until he was about 13 years old and his mother remarried. Antics wasn't physically abused, but it might have been better off if he was. A fistfight might have cleared out a lot of the burden that Antics walked around with. His stepfather was cold and had a little tolerance for Antics' behavior. The worst was a favoritism to Anthony's kid sister. The family didn't have much in the way of money or earning potential, and Antics wore his socioeconomic situation to school every day. There wasn't money for a decent pair of jeans, but his mom sure found a way to make her husband feel comfortable. Yeah, there's plenty of Mama Wilson to share, Antics, and you know that. I know. It's envy, brother. I guess I would have liked for you to know that you could have come to my couch in the middle of the night when your old man was going off the deep end about bullshit that your mom was feeding him. All you can do about it now is be a better person than they are going forward, right? Your couch is welcome to whoever you want now. There wasn't a whole lot that calmed Anthony Reams down. There were drums, punk rock, and the philosophy of Hendrix Wilson. That's all he really needed. Duncannon Valley is the name of a small region of towns that congregate into one area. The more specific you are about where you live and what street you're on, it paints a drastic portrait as to what kind of neighborhood you live in. The house on West Street is in a microtown called Potter. Potter was a small village that was built as someplace for the railroad workers to live as the tracks were being developed. The village evolved from a few small houses and a post office. From there, it was the lowest income neighborhood in the Duncannon Valley. The median education was high school dropout, and the people who owned the houses to rent could hardly afford the taxes, let alone improvements on the homes. Moving into a town like Potter meant that you accepted you'd be waken up by the sounds of domestic disputes and loud parties. That being said, who'd ever guess you'd see a car screaming down the street, lights blinking and horn blaring? Hendrix, "Who was that?" Antics asked as he shielded his eyes, trying to get a better look at the car. "Well, I don't know. Neighbors, maybe?" As the car approached, the sound of loud music began to intrude through the din of the car horn. Hendricks and Anthony were standing at this point, half ready to jump inside the door and out of the way of the vehicle should it decide to ram the porch. "Hey!" A girl was screaming out of the window as the car passed by. "It's Geezer Night at the Pescadero! Free admission!" The battered yellow car was gone as fast as it approached. The cigarette in Antic's mouth nearly fell out as he watched the taillights fade into the night. "Danny! Lauren! It's Geezer Night!" Hendricks called into the house and jumped into the passenger seat of the Skank.